I stood frozen on my porch, the envelope trembling in my hand. Inside was an invoice, $80,000, for a wedding I wasn't even invited to, for a honeymoon I'd never see. My own son had written only 7 words. This is your responsibility. Responsibility. After raising him alone when his mother died, after paying his college debts, after giving him every dollar I could spare, now I was nothing but his wallet. My son didn't just cut me out of his wedding, he cut me out of his life. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Rick Mullins sat quietly in the back pew of St. Andrew's, the familiar smell of polished wood and candle wax surrounding him. Church was his one constant since Mary passed, a place where silence filled the cracks of his loneliness. But that morning, silence shattered. 2 women in front of him whispered excitedly. Rick wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried. Daniel's wedding is set for June 14th, one said. Samantha's family booked the ballroom at the Hyatt. Can you believe it? Rick's chest tightened. June 14th, his son's wedding. He sat frozen, pulse hammering in his ears. No invitation had arrived in his mailbox, no call, nothing. After the service, Rick walked out slowly, his hand brushing the cool stone of the church wall as if steadying himself. His son, the boy he raised, the man he sacrificed for, was getting married, and Rick had to hear it secondhand from strangers. The drive home blurred past, each stoplight a reminder of conversations that never came. In his small living room, beneath the framed photo of Mary smiling in her wedding dress, Rick picked up the phone and dialed Daniel's number. It rang. Once. Twice. Then Daniel's voice, casual, distracted. Hey, Dad, what's up? Rick swallowed. I heard something today about a wedding date, June 14th. A pause, then a chuckle, nervous and dismissive. Oh, yeah, we're still finalizing details. Nothing set in stone. Rick's hand tightened on the receiver. Finalizing? People at church already know. Why didn't I hear it from you? Daniel coughed. Dad, it's complicated right now. Look, I'll call you later, okay? The line clicked dead before Rick could protest. The silence in his house felt heavier than stone. He looked again at Mary's photo, her smile frozen in another lifetime. Memories rushed him. Daniel at 18, shoulders slumped beneath the weight of college tuition bills. Rick working extra shifts at the garage, slipping folded checks into Daniel's hand with a quiet, "Don't worry about it, son." He had done without, lived modestly, so Daniel could stand tall in the world. That was the deal. That was fatherhood. But now his son's life was moving forward without him. That evening, Martha came by, carrying a casserole wrapped in foil. She always seemed to sense when her brother's heart was heavier than usual. Rick told her what happened, the words tasting bitter as he spoke them. She sighed, setting the dish on the counter. Rick, you need to talk to him face to face. No more phone calls, no more waiting. Drive over there and ask him directly. He owes you that much. Rick rubbed his temples. What if he doesn't want me there? What if... His voice trailed off. Then at least you'll know, Martha said softly. That night, under a bruised sky, Rick drove across town. Daniel's house sat sharp and new, all clean lines and manicured lawn, so different from the modest home Rick kept patched together with his own hands. He parked at the curb, straightened his jacket, and walked up the steps. The porch light buzzed faintly overhead. Rick knocked once, then again. Inside, shadows moved. Laughter echoed faintly from a television, but no one came. He waited, knocked again. His knuckles scraped raw against the door's hard wood. Finally, the laughter inside grew louder, drowning him out, and Rick realized his son knew he was there, and still he would not open the door. Rick stood motionless, the night air pressing cold against his skin. He turned back toward his truck, each step heavier than the last. As he sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel until his hands ached, a single thought seared through him. The bond between father and son had cracked, and this was only the beginning. The rain tapped gently against the kitchen window as Rick sat at the old oak table, staring at the fading photograph of his wedding day. He could almost hear the clinking of glasses, the low hum of laughter, Mary's soft hand tightening around his as they swayed to music only they could hear. It had been a modest ceremony, nothing extravagant, just family, close friends, and promises spoken with sincerity. Back then, it wasn't about appearances or guest lists. It was about love, the kind that carried them through decades, until cancer stole her away. He closed his eyes and imagined what Mary would say if she were here. She would have been radiant at Daniel's wedding, fussing over details, crying when the vows were spoken. Rick had pictured himself standing tall, watching his son at the altar, maybe even saying a few words about family, loyalty, and the way a father always carries his son's burdens, no matter how heavy. Instead, he sat alone, the silence in his house deafening. The phone, perched on the counter, mocked him with its stillness. He checked it again, though he knew it hadn't rung. Hours ticked by before it finally lit up. Daniel's name. Rick answered quickly, his heart jumping. "Daniel," his son's voice came sharp, almost rehearsed. "Dad, I need to tell you something straight. You're not on the list." Rick froze. For a moment, the words didn't make sense. "What do you mean, not on what list?" "The guest list, for the wedding." Daniel's tone was flat, as if he were talking about removing a stranger's name from an email chain. Rick's throat tightened. "Daniel, I'm your father. How can I not be at your wedding? That's not possible." "It's complicated," Daniel replied. "Samantha's family has expectations. They want things a certain way. We can't have—" He stopped himself, then muttered, "It just doesn't work." Rick's voice cracked, desperate. "Doesn't work? I raised you, son. I sacrificed for you. I was there when no one else was. How do I explain this? How do I explain not being there when you marry the woman you love?" There was silence on the line, broken only by Daniel's impatient sigh. "Dad, please don't make this harder. I don't want to argue. Just accept it. Accept it." The words stabbed deeper than any insult could. Rick gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles white. Humiliation burned through him, but beneath it was something worse. Betrayal. A cold, cutting betrayal from the one person he thought could never turn his back. He wanted to shout, to rage, to demand an explanation. Instead, his voice fell into a broken whisper. "After everything, this is how it ends?" But Daniel had already moved on. "I'll call you later," he said, and the line went dead. Rick sat in silence, staring at the lifeless phone, the echo of his son's dismissal rattling in his chest. He felt small, like a man erased from his own bloodline. The door creaked open, and Martha stepped in, her umbrella dripping on the mat. She looked at Rick's face, pale and hollow, and she knew. He didn't need to explain. He told her anyway. Each word cut him as he spoke, his sister's hand trembling as it reached for his shoulder. "Rick," she whispered, "this isn't about seating charts or Samantha's family. Don't fool yourself. This is more than just a wedding. He's cutting you out." The words landed heavier than Daniel's had. Cutting him out, not just from the wedding, but from his son's life, from the future. Rick's gaze drifted back to Mary's photograph, her frozen smile suddenly unbearable. His chest ached, but his eyes stayed dry. Something inside him was shifting, hardening, as if a door had quietly closed. And in that silence, he understood. This was only the beginning of losing everything. The Italian restaurant buzzed with warmth and chatter, glasses clinking, silverware scraping against plates. Rick paused just inside the doorway, taking in the long table filled with relatives, faces he had known his whole life. Martha waved him over, relief flickering in her eyes. For days she'd urged him to come, telling him that maybe, just maybe, Daniel would explain himself if family was around. Rick slid into a chair near the end of the table, his stomach tight, his hands restless. He hadn't seen his son in weeks. The air smelled of garlic and wine, but to Rick, it all felt sour. The door opened again, and the room shifted. Daniel strode in, Samantha at his side. She looked polished, camera ready, her hand resting proudly on his arm. Daniel's grin was wide as he began describing wedding preparations before he'd even sat down. "Venue's locked," Daniel announced. Catering's top tier. Samantha's family has been incredible, helping with everything. It's going to be elegant. Rick's heart tightened at the word, elegant. He knew what was coming before Samantha's sharp voice delivered the blow. We had to make tough choices, she said with a smile too tight to be kind. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Rick, like a knife glancing over skin. But we want the wedding to be refined. You know, no awkwardness, just keeping things elegant. The word lingered in the air, heavy with implication. Rick shifted in his chair. Around the table, forks paused. Cousins and uncles stole quick glances at him, then back down at their plates. Not one spoke. Rick's jaw worked as he tried to stay composed, but his voice broke free before he could stop it. I'm your father. His words cracked across the table, silencing even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Daniel leaned back slowly, his expression smooth, almost bored. And this is my wedding, he replied coolly, as if the two roles, father and groom, had no connection, no weight. His voice carried the finality of a door being slammed shut. Rick's breath caught in his chest. The eyes of the family pressed against him, hot with discomfort. Some looked sympathetic, others guilty, but none spoke. Not one relative defended him. Not one dared challenge Daniel or Samantha. The air grew unbearable. Rick pushed back from the table, the chair scraping loud against the floor. He stood there for a heartbeat, his gaze locked on his son, the boy he'd once carried on his shoulders, now a man he hardly recognized. He wanted to say more, to lay bare the years of sacrifice, the countless ways he had built Daniel's life, brick by brick. But no words came, only silence, thick and suffocating. So he turned. Rick walked through the restaurant, past tables of strangers who looked up briefly, sensing drama but not knowing its weight. His footsteps echoed against tile, each one heavier than the last. Outside, the night air was cool, but it didn't soothe him. His chest felt hollow, his throat raw. Behind him, through the glass, the family stirred back into motion. Murmurs rose, soft and sharp, whispers rippling through the room, questions asked in hushed tones. He couldn't hear the words, but he knew their shape. Pity, judgment, scandal. Rick gripped the steering wheel in the parking lot, sitting motionless as his breath fogged the windshield. The sound of Daniel's voice echoed in his head. This is my wedding. The words weren't just exclusion, they were exile. And for the first time, Rick felt the full gravity of what Martha had warned him. This wasn't just about a ceremony. His son was cutting him out of the family, piece by piece, in front of everyone. And Rick knew, with a sinking weight, that the humiliation he endured tonight was only the beginning. The weeks after the dinner crawled by in silence. Rick kept waiting for a call, a knock on the door, any sign that Daniel might come to his senses. But the house stayed quiet, the phone stayed cold, and the air around him thickened with disappointment. One Tuesday morning, as he shuffled to the porch in his slippers, Rick noticed a package sitting on the steps. It wasn't a gift-wrapped box or something from the hardware store. It was a thick manila envelope with his son's name typed in bold across the corner. His pulse quickened as he carried it inside. Maybe this was it, an invitation, a letter of apology, some gesture of reconciliation. He tore it open at the kitchen table. A stack of papers slid out, crisp, official-looking. At the top, in block letters, invoice, wedding and honeymoon contributions. The number nearly knocked the breath out of him. $80,000. $80,000. Rick's hands trembled as he flipped through line items. Venue rental, catering, dress alterations, flights to Greece, hotel suites, champagne service. Every indulgence neatly tallied, every extravagance accounted for. At the bottom was a typed note, cold and impersonal. This is your responsibility. Daniel's name signed at the bottom. No dad, no warmth, just a demand, as though Rick were nothing more than a wallet to be emptied. His chest tightened. He pressed a hand against the table to steady himself, bile rising in his throat. His mind spun back through years of sacrifice, long nights at the garage, grease under his nails, the ache in his back. Every dollar he saved had gone into Daniel's future. He remembered paying off his son's college loans, covering his first car repair, slipping him money when he and Samantha wanted that apartment downtown. And now, this. Rick stumbled into the living room, dropping onto the sofa as the papers slid from his lap and scattered on the carpet. His breath came shallow, ragged. Anger and disbelief clashed inside him, a storm breaking through his veins. He grabbed the phone, his fingers fumbling as he dialed Daniel's number. It rang once, twice, then voicemail. Rick tried again and again. Each time, the call went unanswered. "Pick up, damn it!" Rick shouted at the machine, his voice cracked, hoarse with fury. "You think you can do this to me, after everything? Pick up!" But the silence that followed was merciless. Rick sat hunched, the phone slipping from his grip, the hum of the dial tone buzzing against his ear. His eyes fell to the wedding invoice on the floor, the black ink glaring up at him like an accusation. Slowly, with shaking hands, he gathered the papers, held them tight, then ripped them down the middle. The sound was sharp, tearing through the silence. He ripped again and again until the invoice lay in shredded ribbons at his feet. His chest heaved as he looked at the mess, his fury hardening into something darker. The humiliation at the restaurant, the rejection from the wedding, and now this obscene demand. It wasn't just negligence. It was deliberate. A son pushing his father to the margins, stripping him of dignity, treating him as nothing. Rick stood, his face flushed, his fists still clenched with scraps of paper. He looked up at Mary's photo on the mantel. Her gentle smile, once a comfort, now felt like a judgment. His voice came out low, guttural, almost a growl. "He will regret this." The words hung in the air, heavier than any prayer he had ever spoken. They weren't just a reaction, they were a vow, a promise. And as the shredded invoice scattered across the carpet like ashes, Rick knew there was no turning back. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Patel's office buzzed faintly as Rick sat on the paper-lined exam table, his calloused hands gripping the edge. He felt out of place in the sterile room, a man built from grease and sweat, now reduced to a chart and a monitor. Dr. Patel stood with arms crossed, his brow furrowed as he studied the numbers on the blood pressure cuff. "Rick, this isn't good," he said finally, pulling the Velcro loose from Rick's arm. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high. You're walking straight toward a stroke, or worse." Rick forced a humorless smile. "Guess that's what happens when you get old." But Patel shook his head. "This isn't just age. This is stress, anger. You're carrying it like a ticking bomb in your chest. You need to let it go, Rick. Take the medication. Slow down." Rick's jaw tightened. The idea of surrendering, of numbing himself with pills, felt like betrayal. "No," he said firmly. "I don't need drugs. I need to fix my family first." Patel sighed, frustrated but gentle. "You can't fix anything if you're dead." Rick left without answering, the doctor's warning echoing in his mind like a bell he refused to hear. That evening, Martha stopped by, her presence a quiet balm in the storm of his thoughts. She poured tea into his chipped mug, her eyes searching his face. "You're not yourself, Rick," she said softly. "You're thinner. You're tired. This obsession, it's eating you alive." Rick stared at the steam curling from the cup, then shook his head. "I can't just drop it, Martha. He's my son, and he's treating me like I'm nothing." Martha reached across the table, her hand resting on his. "Sometimes letting go is the only way to keep your heart intact." Rick pulled his hand back. "My heart's already broken. Letting go won't fix that." Later, when the house grew quiet again, Rick sat in front of the glow of his computer screen. He hadn't meant to look, but the temptation gnawed at him until he typed Daniel's name into Facebook. The page lit up with photos, Daniel beaming in designer suits, Samantha flashing a diamond ring in exotic settings, captions full of hashtags and champagne emojis. One post made Rick's chest burn hottest. "So grateful for our amazing families making this dream wedding possible. Couldn't do it without you." The comments overflowed with praise. "You two are goals. What generous parents." But all Rick could see was the lie. His son paraded through life, flaunting a lifestyle that the world believed was parent-funded, while Rick hadn't paid a single cent. He was erased, rewritten out of his own role as father, replaced by a fiction Daniel crafted for applause. Each photo cut deeper. Samantha posing in front of floral arrangements, Daniel toasting champagne at a rehearsal dinner, a snapshot of the honeymoon tickets stamped and ready. Rick leaned back, his hands trembling against the armrests of his chair. At first, the images stabbed like daggers. But then, slowly, the pain cooled into something harder, a resolve taking shape, sharp and unyielding. He whispered into the empty room, his voice gravelly but steady. "If he wants me gone, I'll give him a reason to remember me." The words lingered, heavier than any oath. His bitterness was no longer a wound, it was armor. And for the first time in weeks, Rick's breathing steadied, not from peace, but from purpose. The rain came steady that morning, drumming against the roof of Rick's old pickup as he steered it toward the church. His wipers squeaked across the windshield, barely keeping up with the downpour. He hadn't been invited, hadn't been wanted, but some stubborn part of him refused to stay away. A father had a place at his son's wedding, if not inside, then at least nearby. He parked at the far edge of the lot, the cracked asphalt glistening with puddles. For a long moment, he sat behind the wheel, staring at the glowing stained glass windows, the church bells muffled by rain. His chest tightened. He thought of Mary again, how she would have fussed over Daniel's tie, how her eyes would have shone at this day. She should have been here. She should have seen it. Instead, Rick sat alone. Finally, he stepped out, pulling his jacket tight against the rain. His shoes splashed through shallow puddles as he crossed the lot, every step heavier than the last. He stopped just short of the church's wide glass doors. Through the pane, he saw Daniel, his son. Dressed in a black tuxedo, tall and confident, laughing with groomsmen. The sight was both breathtaking and unbearable. Rick pressed a palm against the cold glass, wanting to knock, to push it open, to claim his place. But he didn't. He couldn't. He wasn't wanted. Movement on the other side caught his eye. Samantha appeared in a flurry of white satin and lace, her bridesmaids circling her like satellites. Her face lit with a practiced smile, but when her eyes flicked toward the door, toward Rick, the smile twisted. For the briefest moment, she smirked, a curl of satisfaction. She saw him standing there, excluded, diminished, and she relished it. The bridesmaids giggled, leaning close, whispering to one another as they swept past. Their heels clicked against the polished floor, the sound carrying even through the glass. Rick stepped back into the rain, his throat tight, his hands clenched. Guests began arriving in clusters, umbrellas blooming like black flowers. Some noticed him immediately, standing alone on the steps, soaked through. A few glanced quickly away, embarrassed for him. Others lingered, whispering behind cupped hands. Pity etched some faces, scorn etched others. To them, he was a relic, an unwanted man lingering at the edges of celebration. Rick's eyes never left the doors. Through them, he saw ushers guiding families to their seats, saw Samantha's parents standing tall and proud, saw Daniel shake hands and beam, all the images he had dreamed of for years, walking his son down the aisle, delivering a father's speech, giving his blessing, were happening without him, stolen from him. The rain plastered his hair against his forehead, ran down into his eyes, until salt and water blurred together. Tears or rain, it hardly mattered. Both fell freely, streaking down his weathered face. He whispered, barely audible, his voice rough with rage and grief, "Enjoy it while you can." The words cut through the rain like a vow. They weren't just spoken into the empty air, they were directed inward, carved into his own resolve. Rick stepped back from the doors, his outline reflected faintly in the glass. He saw himself, an old man, drenched and defeated. But behind the reflection, he saw Daniel glowing in his tuxedo, Samantha radiant at his side. The contrast seared him. He turned toward his truck, shoulders squared, rain soaking through to his skin. The humiliation of that day would not vanish. It would not fade with time. It would fester. It would sharpen. And as he climbed into the cab, slamming the door against the storm, Rick felt something shift deep inside. No longer just heartbreak, no longer just grief. The seed of revenge had been planted, and it was taking root. The envelope sat like a snake in Rick's mailbox, coiled and waiting. He tore it open on the porch, rainwater dripping from the gutters, and inside found another invoice. This one was shorter, but no less venomous. Expenses incurred. Honeymoon costs. The number at the bottom was obscene. A list of charges. Airfare, resort stays, private tours. At the end, the same curt note. This is your responsibility. Rick's hands shook. The papers fluttered from his grasp, landing in the wet grass. For a moment, he just stared at them. His breath ragged, his chest aching with fury. Then he bent down, snatched them up, and stormed inside. The walls of his modest living room seemed to close in on him. With a guttural roar, he hurled the invoice across the room. It slapped against the wall and slid to the floor, joining the shredded remnants of the first bill still scattered like confetti. "Enough!" he shouted into the empty house. His voice cracked, echoing off the plaster. "Enough!" He grabbed his keys, stormed out, and drove straight to Daniel's office. His tires screeched as he pulled into the lot. The glass-fronted building gleamed, polished and corporate, paid for, Rick knew, with other people's sweat. Inside the lobby, 2 security guards intercepted him before he could reach the elevators. "I need to see my son," Rick demanded, his voice low but shaking. "Daniel Mullen. Tell him his father's here." The guards exchanged glances. One of them shook his head. "Sorry, sir. You're not on the approved list." Rick's chest burned hotter. "Not on the list?" The words echoed the same cruelty he had heard about the wedding. Again, he was erased, unwelcome, cast out. He turned sharply and stormed back to his truck, the glass doors reflecting his hunched figure as if mocking him. That night, the glow of his computer illuminated the darkened living room. Rick scrolled through Facebook, each click a fresh wound. There they were, Daniel and Samantha, lounging on white sand beaches, champagne flutes raised against the turquoise sea. Poses on cobblestone streets in Greece, arms around each other, Samantha flashing her diamond at the camera. The captions were smug, dripping with entitlement. Making memories thanks to family support. So blessed. Rick's jaw clenched until his teeth hurt. Family support. The lie stung worse than the demand. He printed the photos one by one. The printer whirred and spat them out, each glossy image a provocation. Daniel on a yacht. Samantha by an infinity pool. Both of them living large, pretending it was their birthright. Rick tacked them to the wall above his desk, stabbing each one with a pushpin. The images formed a collage of betrayal. He stood back, breathing heavily, staring at the smug smiles that seemed to laugh at him through the paper. He opened a notebook, its pages blank, and pressed the pen down so hard the tip nearly tore the paper. His handwriting scrawled uneven, jagged. "He killed the father I was. Now I'll bury the son he is." The words looked raw, violent, final. He closed the book and left it on the desk, the photos glaring down from above like witnesses. A knock startled him. Martha stepped inside, carrying groceries. Her eyes immediately went to the wall, to the photos stabbed into place, to the notebook lying open. "Rick." Her voice trembled. "What are you doing?" He turned toward her, his face flushed, eyes wild with a kind of focus she had never seen before. "This isn't right," he muttered. "He can't do this to me. He won't get away with it." Martha stepped closer, lowering the bag of groceries. "You're scaring me, Rick. This isn't you." But Rick didn't answer. His gaze returned to the photos, to Daniel's smiling face, and his silence spoke louder than words. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of leather and coffee, lined with shelves of books that looked more decorative than used. Rick sat stiff in the chair across from a young attorney in a tailored suit, the kind of man who probably never had grease under his nails or dirt on his hands. Rick slid the crumpled invoice across the polished desk. "My son sent me this, demanding $80,000 for his wedding and honeymoon. I want to fight it, legally." The lawyer skimmed the papers, his lips twitching upward in disbelief. A chuckle escaped before he could suppress it. "Mr. Mullen, I'm sorry, but this..." He tapped the invoice with his manicured finger. "This isn't legally binding. It's a letter, nothing more. You don't owe him a dime." Rick's face flushed hot. You're telling me he can send me this, humiliate me, and there's nothing I can do? Nothing you need to do, the lawyer corrected lightly, leaning back in his chair. Ignore it. Toss it in the trash. He has no legal claim. The dismissiveness stung more than the words. Rick clenched his fists, fighting to keep his voice steady. What about everything I gave him before? The loans, the money for college, his first apartment. Can I sue for that? The lawyer raised a brow. Do you have contracts? Promissory notes? Anything in writing? Rick's shoulders sagged. No, it was my son, my word, my money. Then you have nothing. The lawyer closed the file, sliding it back across the desk with finality. Family matters don't hold up in court without paperwork. I'm afraid the law can't help you here. Rick stared at the folder, the glossy desk reflecting his defeated expression back at him. For a long moment, he didn't move. The law, the one thing he thought might still carry weight, had turned its back on him just as surely as his son had. He rose slowly, thanked the lawyer with a hollow voice, and walked out. The afternoon sun outside seemed too bright, too sharp. Rick drove aimlessly for an hour before pulling into Dr. Patel's clinic. His chest had been tight all morning, and though he hated admitting it, he knew the doctor would notice the strain. Inside, Patel studied his vitals with the same concern he had voiced before. Your numbers are worse, Rick. I told you before. You're pushing yourself too hard. This obsession with Daniel, it's killing you. Rick gave a bitter laugh. Killing me? No, Doc. It's the only thing keeping me alive. If I let go now, if I just accept what he's done, then I've got nothing left. Patel's voice softened. You still have time to turn this around, to find peace. Rick shook his head. Peace is for people who haven't been spit on by their own blood. He stood, gathering his jacket. I can't stop, Doc. Not yet. That night, Rick sat at his desk, the shredded invoices still scattered in the corner. He pulled out his old laptop, the keys worn smooth from years of use. The screen glowed pale in the darkened room as he typed his son's name into search bars, clicking through business listings, articles, financial records. Daniel's company website boasted promises of trust and success, but reviews told another story. Complaints buried beneath polished marketing, clients hinting at delays, missing funds, unexplained fees. Rick leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. There were cracks here, fissures in the image Daniel projected to the world. He scribbled notes in his journal, dates and names and details. The frustration that had nearly broken him earlier now sharpened into something steadier. If the law wouldn't stand by him, then he would find another way. Rick stared at the glowing screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. His hands no longer trembled. Daniel thought he could humiliate him, erase him, demand his silence. But Rick wasn't done, not by a long shot. The house was quiet except for the low hum of Rick's aging laptop. He sat hunched at the kitchen table, the glow from the screen painting his face in cold light. It had been weeks since he first typed Daniel's company name into a search bar, and now the bookmarks in his browser formed a constellation of suspicion. The company's homepage gleamed with polished promises, trust, security, growth. But beneath the glossy facade, Rick had found cracks. Client reviews buried at the bottom of obscure forums told a different story. Missed payments, unexplained fees, investments that vanished without explanation. Words like fraud and scam appeared often enough to make his pulse quicken. Each discovery left him both sick and strangely vindicated. His son, the golden boy, the man who had dismissed him as unworthy, was building his empire on rotted beams. Martha noticed his obsession growing, the late nights, the stacks of scribbled notes piling up on his table. One evening, she placed a hand on his arm. Rick, I think you should talk to someone who knows this world. You're digging blind. Let me call an old friend. He used to work in finance. Maybe he can make sense of what you're finding. Rick hesitated, but finally nodded. A week later, they met her friend, a wiry man named Glenn, in the corner booth of a diner that smelled of bacon grease and burnt coffee. Glenn carried himself like someone who had seen too much but forgotten nothing. He listened patiently as Rick laid out his findings, sliding over a folder thick with printouts. When Glenn finished scanning, he gave a low whistle. "You've stumbled onto something real here. These aren't just sloppy mistakes. Your son's been moving money around, hiding losses. And if I'm reading this right, he's been dipping into client accounts to cover his tracks. That's embezzlement." The word landed like a hammer. Rick gripped the edge of the booth, his stomach twisting. Embezzlement. The kind of crime that could destroy a man's career, his reputation, his freedom. Glenn lowered his voice. "If regulators saw this, he'd be finished, but it won't be easy proving it. He's careful. People like your son. They know how to cover their tracks." Rick sat back, his hands shaking slightly. Guilt tugged at him. This was his son, his only son. He should have been protecting him, not planning his downfall. But then he remembered the invoices, the laughter at the wedding, the smug posts from Greece. He remembered standing in the rain outside the church, locked out of his own bloodline. "He stole from me," Rick muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "Every dollar I had, every ounce of respect. He took it all." That night, Rick returned home with a new sense of purpose. He began combing through public records, court filings, business registrations, property deeds. Some were free, others he paid small fees to access. He downloaded spreadsheets, balance sheets, scanned contracts, slowly piecing together the puzzle. Each time he clicked save, he felt a rush of adrenaline. He copied files onto a flash drive, labeled folders meticulously, building a case brick by brick. The thrill of discovery was intoxicating. For the first time in months, he felt control returning to his hands. Yet beneath the thrill lurked guilt, like a shadow clinging to his heels. Every document he downloaded was a betrayal of his own flesh and blood. But Daniel had already betrayed him first, cut him out, humiliated him, demanded money as if he were nothing more than a walking wallet. Rick stood in his study, staring at the growing stack of evidence. His heart thudded with a strange mixture of sorrow and satisfaction. He whispered to the silent room, his voice low and steady. "You stole from me. Now I'll steal your life." The words settled into the air like smoke, irreversible. The coffee shop smelled faintly of burnt beans and damp coats. Rick sat at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup, eyes fixed on the man across from him. His name was Howard, mid-60s. His shoulders slumped under a weight heavier than age. His hands shook as he stirred his coffee, though his voice carried the sharp edge of bitterness. "I gave him everything," Howard said. 35 years of savings. My wife and I thought we were set. A cabin in Michigan, money for the grandkids' college. Then one day, gone. Just gone. Rick listened, his chest tightening with every word. Howard's story was too familiar. Trust betrayed, future stolen, dignity stripped away. "He promised steady returns," Howard continued, stabbing his spoon into the foam. "Said it was foolproof. I checked in once, and the numbers looked fine. Next time I checked, the account was drained. And when I tried to get answers..." Howard gave a humorless laugh. "His secretary wouldn't even put me through. Said Daniel was too busy to take calls." Rick nodded slowly. He let silence hang for a moment, then spoke quietly. "You're not the only one. I know what he's done. To you, to others, even to me." Howard studied him, suspicion in his eyes, but there was something else too, a spark of recognition, of shared pain. "You know him?" Rick hesitated before answering. "He's my son." Howard's jaw dropped slightly. He leaned back, disbelief flickering across his face. "Your son? Then why the hell are you here?" Rick's voice was steady, though it scraped against his throat. "Because blood doesn't erase the truth. He took from me too, and I'm not looking the other way anymore." The words settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Slowly, Howard's suspicion eased. He nodded once, then began talking, really talking, about numbers that didn't add up, about friends who had lost their savings, about sleepless nights and broken marriages caused by Daniel's schemes. Rick listened, asked questions, and wrote everything down. For weeks afterward, Rick met with Howard and others like him, quietly gathering their stories. Each testimony became another nail in Daniel's coffin. He documented dates, withdrawals, inconsistencies. He mapped out patterns in Daniel's fraud, tracing stolen funds as they disappeared into shell accounts and reappeared in personal expenses. The personal expenses told their own story. Samantha's Instagram painted it in high resolution: designer handbags, luxury cars, rooftop dinners in cities they had no business being in. Each photo was another receipt, another piece of evidence that their lifestyle was built on stolen money. Rick pinned those images to his growing wall of documents. Samantha in Paris with a Chanel bag, Daniel at a casino table in Vegas, Samantha lounging beside a pool in Dubai. Together, the collage looked less like a family album and more like an indictment. Every night, Rick stood before that wall, studying it, memorizing every detail. The anger that had once consumed him now sharpened into something colder, more deliberate. He began sketching out a plan, not just to expose Daniel, but to do it publicly, on a stage so grand there would be no coming back. Quietly leaking information wouldn't be enough. The humiliation had to be as complete as the betrayal had been. Rick sat in his chair, the house dark around him, except for the lamplight spilling across his desk. He picked up the framed photo of Mary, their wedding day smile frozen in time. For a long moment, he stared at it, his thumb tracing the edge of the glass. "I wish you were here," he whispered. His voice broke, then steadied into a growl. "But you'll see justice. I promise you that." He set the photo back on the desk, turned toward the wall of evidence, and felt a grim satisfaction settle in his chest. The trap was nearly ready, and when it snapped shut, Daniel would never see it coming. The envelope arrived with the same polished lettering, the same weight of insult. Rick sat at the kitchen table staring at it, his hands calm for once. He knew before opening it what it would contain. Another demand, another attempt to squeeze him like an empty sponge. He tore it open anyway. Final notice: family contribution. Outstanding. The words sprawled across the page like a mockery, followed by another inflated figure. This time, there was no itemized list, no pretense of legitimacy, just a demand, blunt and arrogant. Rick let out a sound that startled even himself. It wasn't anger, it wasn't despair, it was laughter, low and humorless. For the first time in months, his lips curled into a smirk. "He doesn't know what's coming," Rick muttered. He set the letter down, folded it neatly, and slid it beneath a pile of documents on his desk. No need to shred it this time. It was proof. Proof that Daniel still thought his father was weak, a man who could be bullied with invoices and threats. The thought almost amused him. That evening, Martha stopped by with soup in a thermos, the way she always did when she feared he wasn't eating enough. She found him in the study, the desk buried beneath papers, photos pinned to the wall in neat rows, his pen scratched across a yellow legal pad, his face illuminated by the dim light of a single lamp. "Rick," she said softly, setting the thermos down, "you're scaring me." He didn't look up. "Why?" "Because you're not yourself anymore. You used to laugh. You used to care about other things. Now it's just this. Daniel, the money, the files. It's all you talk about. It's all you breathe." Rick finally lifted his gaze, his eyes sharp, unblinking. "I'm not losing my son, Martha. I'm ending him." The words landed like stones. Martha flinched, tears welling in her eyes. "Listen to yourself. He's your blood. He's still your child no matter what he's done." Rick shook his head. "He stopped being my son the day he shut me out, the day he made me a stranger at my own family's table. This isn't blood anymore. This is war." Martha's hand trembled as she reached for him. "Please, Rick, don't go too far. Don't let him destroy what's left of you." But he turned away, pulling open the bottom drawer of his desk. From it, he lifted a thick manila folder. The word Daniel was scrawled across the front in block letters. He laid it on the desk and flipped it open. Martha's breath caught at the sight inside. Pages of printouts, bank statements, photographs clipped neatly in rows, charts with dates and arrows, mapping money as it disappeared from accounts and reappeared in luxury purchases. Notes scrawled in Rick's jagged handwriting, connecting dots like a detective building a case. "This," Rick said quietly, is everything. His fraud, his arrogance, his lies, every dollar he stole, every victim he left behind. Martha shook her head, her voice breaking. You're talking like a man building a weapon. Rick closed the folder, his hand pressing against it firmly, almost reverently. That's exactly what it is. Silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Martha turned away, wiping her eyes. She didn't argue further. She couldn't. When she left, Rick sat alone in the dim light, the folder resting beneath his hand. His pulse was steady. His mind sharper than it had been in years. The chaos of grief and betrayal had crystallized into focus. He leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to Mary's photo on the shelf. For a moment, he almost smiled at her. Not the smile of a husband remembering love, but of a soldier preparing for victory. His countermove was nearly ready, and when it landed, Daniel would never recover. The diner was half empty that afternoon, the smell of fried onions and stale coffee hanging in the air. Rick sat in a booth near the window, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug, eyes fixed on the parking lot beyond the glass. He hadn't come for food. He was here because Martha had insisted, said an old friend of hers might be able to help. A man slid into the seat across from him without asking, broad-shouldered, late 60s, hair gone silver at the temples. His jacket still carried the faint stiffness of a uniform long retired. He extended a hand. Name's Jack, he said. His grip was firm, his eyes sharp, the kind of eyes that had spent decades noticing what others tried to hide. Rick nodded, his own hand steady. Martha said you used to be a cop. Jack gave a half smile. Used to be, retired now. But some things don't change. I hear your boy's name more often than you'd think. Rick's jaw tightened. What do you mean? Jack leaned back, folding his arms. Daniel's got a reputation in this town, not the good kind. People talk. Clients who lost money, businesses that went under after trusting him. He's slick, knows how to smile, how to make people feel safe. Then he empties their pockets and blames the market. Classic con, dressed up in a suit. Rick's stomach twisted, though he wasn't surprised. He'd already seen the evidence on paper. Hearing it from a man who'd spent his life chasing liars only confirmed what he knew. Jack leaned forward. Thing is, most of these people don't fight back. They're embarrassed, ashamed they got taken. They stay quiet, and Daniel walks away clean. Rick's voice was low, steady. Not this time. Jack studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I figured. Martha said you've been digging into him. You've got something? Rick hesitated, then slid a folder across the table. Inside were the documents, the timelines, the photos he had spent weeks collecting. Jack flipped through them slowly, his brow furrowing as he took it all in. After a while, he gave a low whistle. You've done your homework. This isn't just smoke. This is fire. Enough to burn him down if you're careful. Rick felt a grim satisfaction rise in his chest. That's the plan. Jack closed the folder and tapped it with his finger. You realize what you're starting here? Once this ball starts rolling, you can't stop it. And if it goes wrong, it could take you down with him. Rick's eyes didn't waver. There's no going back already. The diner went quiet around them, just the faint rattle of dishes and the hiss of a fryer in the kitchen. Jack studied Rick one last time, then gave a short nod. All right, you've made up your mind. I'll help, but we do this smart. You want him ruined? We tighten the net until he can't breathe. Over the next hour, they spoke in low tones, leaning over the table as Rick laid out what he knew, and Jack explained how men like Daniel operated. Jack pointed out patterns, false statements designed to confuse clients, delayed payouts that mask theft, luxury purchases hidden under business expenses. Classic embezzlement, Jack said, but he's careful. If you want this to stick, you need to connect the dots clean. No gaps, no questions. You're building a case, not a suspicion. Rick scribbled notes, his focus sharper than it had been in years. For the first time, he wasn't alone in this fight. He had an ally, someone who understood the language of deceit and the mechanics of justice. As they wrapped up, Rick glanced toward the window. The sun was setting, painting the lot in streaks of orange and red. He thought of Mary again, her absence heavy as ever, and wondered what she'd think of the man he was becoming. Jack stood, sliding the folder back across the table. "We'll talk again soon. In the meantime, keep digging. Every lie he's told is a thread. Pull enough of them, and the whole thing unravels." Rick took the folder, holding it tight. His heart thudded steady, not from rage this time, but from purpose. Together, they were going to end Daniel's charade. Rick worked in silence, the only sound in the room the faint hum of his old desktop. The documents he and Jack had studied now sat in neat piles, categorized and cross-referenced, every line a thread leading back to Daniel's fraud. It was time to start tugging at those threads. He opened a blank email and began typing. No signature, no identifying details, just facts. Dates of suspicious transfers, names of clients whose accounts had been raided, luxury purchases hidden in company ledgers. He attached copies of the files, each one a small spark meant to ignite a fire. The emails went out to financial regulators, sent through anonymous accounts he'd created at the library. He double-checked, triple-checked, erasing every trace of himself. The regulators would think the tips came from a whistleblower inside Daniel's firm, not from a father seeking vengeance. When the first acknowledgement came back, Rick sat back in his chair, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. The machine had started moving. Across town, Daniel skimmed through his inbox at the office. A message from the securities division popped up, requesting clarification on anomalous filings. Daniel laughed and tossed the email aside. "Another jealous competitor," he muttered, rolling his eyes. When he told Samantha later, her perfectly manicured hand slid onto his shoulder. "That's all it is, baby. You're too good, too successful. People get bitter when they can't compete. Ignore it." Daniel kissed her hand, reassured. "Exactly what I thought." But the regulators weren't the only ones receiving information. Rick had another move in play. He reached out quietly to one of Daniel's rival firms, an old company that Daniel had undercut years ago, stealing clients with promises he couldn't keep. The message Rick sent them was precise, calculated, details of Daniel's misconduct, just enough to raise suspicion and stir the pot. The rivals took the bait eagerly. Within weeks, subtle rumors began to circulate in the market. Whispers that Daniel's numbers didn't add up, that payouts were delayed, that clients should consider safer options elsewhere. Rick watched the ripple effect with cold satisfaction. At first, it was small. A few calls, a few nervous clients asking questions, but then it spread. Clients called more often, their voices uneasy. Accounts were checked twice, 3 times. The trust Daniel had worked so hard to project began to falter. Inside Daniel's office, the pressure built. Assistants fielded calls from worried investors. Account managers grew restless. Daniel, still smug, dismissed it all with a wave of his hand. "Market jitters, they'll calm down." But Rick knew better. He sat in his dimly lit study, the glow of the laptop reflecting in his glasses, reading the latest market chatter. Every doubt planted was a seed. Every seed would grow into suspicion, and suspicion was poison to a man like Daniel. The thrill of it surged through him. This wasn't rage boiling over, it was cold, deliberate. He was pulling the strings, and his son didn't even know he was the puppet. One night, Rick stood in front of the wall he'd built, photos, documents, timelines. He added a new piece, a printout of a message board thread where investors speculated about Daniel's integrity. He pinned it beside the wedding photo of Daniel and Samantha, her smile stretched wide with triumph. The contrast made him smile. For once, Rick was the one holding the upper hand. He whispered under his breath, almost savoring the words, "Let it unravel." And with every passing day, he could feel the unraveling beginning. The country club glowed with warm light spilling out onto the manicured lawn. The air filled with the muted hum of laughter and clinking glasses. Rick adjusted the collar of his jacket, standing at the edge of the entrance, like a shadow at the gates of another world. He didn't belong here. He knew it, and everyone else knew it too. But belonging wasn't the point. Inside, crystal chandeliers glittered overhead as servers carried trays of wine and hors d'oeuvres. The place smelled of money, of old leather, and polished wood. Rick spotted Daniel across the room, laughing too loudly with a cluster of colleagues, Samantha hanging on his arm like jewelry. Rick walked straight toward him, ignoring the stares. Conversations hushed slightly as eyes followed the older man weaving through the crowd. When Daniel noticed him, his laughter faltered for a moment before returning brittle and sharp. "Well, look who it is," Daniel said, his voice carrying enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Still bitter about the wedding, Dad? Couldn't let it go?" A few people chuckled uncomfortably, unsure how to react. Rick stopped a step away, his face calm, his voice steady. "This isn't about a wedding anymore." The words cut through the air with a weight Daniel hadn't expected. His smirk faltered, replaced for an instant by something colder, unease. But then he recovered, letting out a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, come on," Daniel said, raising his glass. "You've been sulking for months. It's embarrassing. People think you've lost it." Rick didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply held his son's gaze, his silence louder than any argument. Samantha stepped in then, her eyes narrowed, her voice dripping with disdain. "Rick, this is pathetic. You're making a scene in front of important people. Do you enjoy humiliating yourself? Because that's all you're accomplishing." Her words stung, but Rick didn't look at her. His focus stayed locked on Daniel. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned in closer, his voice low enough that only his son could hear. "When it comes," Rick whispered, his breath hot against Daniel's ear, "you'll know it was me." Daniel stiffened. The confidence in his posture cracked, replaced by a flicker of fear that he tried quickly to mask. He forced a laugh, stepping back as though to reclaim the upper hand. "See?" Daniel said to the group around him, forcing a smirk. "Crazy old man talk. Nothing to worry about." He sipped his drink with exaggerated calm, but his hand trembled just slightly. Rick caught it. He saw the moment of doubt, the fracture in his son's armor. That was enough. He turned without another word, leaving the room in silence so heavy it pressed against the chandeliers. Daniel stood frozen for a beat longer than he should have, the laughter around him forced, brittle. Samantha whispered something in his ear, but he didn't respond. His eyes followed his father until the door closed behind him. For the first time, Daniel felt the chill of uncertainty crawl up his spine. The house was dark when the knock came. Rick sat in his study, the lamp casting long shadows across the stacks of papers and photographs that had become his nightly company. He didn't move at first, assuming it was his imagination, just the creak of an old house. But then the knock came again, sharper, urgent. He rose, stiff from hours in the chair, and opened the door. Martha stood there, her hair damp from the night air, her eyes red, as if she'd already been crying. "Rick," she whispered, "we need to talk." He stepped aside without a word. She walked into the living room and stopped short at the sight of the wall. Photos, notes, timelines, articles pinned with precision. The evidence of months of obsession laid bare. Her hand went to her mouth. "Oh God," she breathed, "what have you done to yourself?" Rick closed the door behind them. "I've done what I had to, what no one else would." Martha turned to him, her voice trembling. "This has to stop, Rick. It's eating you alive. You barely sleep. You don't eat. You're consumed by him. Don't you see it's destroying you?" Rick's expression didn't change. His eyes, once warm with the patience of an older brother, now glinted with something harder. "It's not destroying me. It's giving me purpose." She shook her head, stepping closer, her voice cracking. "He's still your son." Rick's jaw tightened. "No, he was my son. Once. That boy died the moment Daniel chose money and arrogance over blood." Martha gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks. "How can you say that? He's your flesh and blood. If you cut him out completely, then you've already lost, Rick. You've lost more than he ever took from you." Her words hit like stones, but Rick didn't flinch. His gaze slid past her, to the photo of Mary on the mantel. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes, regret, maybe, or grief, but it passed as quickly as it came. He turned his back to Martha, his shoulders rigid. "No," he said quietly, his voice low but certain. "I'm finally winning." Martha stood frozen, her breath hitching. The man before her, the brother who had once fixed her car at midnight, who had carried her through her own grief, felt like a stranger. She wiped her tears with shaking hands, staring at the wall of evidence as if it were a tombstone. Rick didn't look at her again. He walked back to his desk, sat down, and opened the folder labeled Daniel. His hands moved steadily, arranging documents, notes, like a craftsman refining his weapon. Behind him, Martha's sobs filled the room, her pleas unraveling into silence. She finally turned and left, the door closing softly behind her. The house was quiet once more, save for the scratching of Rick's pen. The moral line had been crossed. The call came on a gray Tuesday morning. Daniel was in his office, leaning back in his leather chair, when his assistant knocked lightly on the door. She looked pale, nervous, as if she'd just witnessed a car crash. "Mr. Mullen," she said, "Mr. Crawford is on the line. He says it's urgent." Daniel frowned, picked up the phone, and forced a cheerful tone. "Crawford, my man, what can I do for you?" The voice on the other end was flat, clipped. "You can tell me why there are whispers that my account isn't secure, why other firms are warning me about your books." Daniel's smile faltered. "Rumors? Jealous competitors trying to steal business. You know how this town works." "I don't deal in rumors," Crawford snapped. "I deal in facts. And the fact is, I don't trust you anymore. I'm moving my account, effective immediately." The line went dead. Daniel stared at the phone, his chest tightening. Crawford wasn't just any client. He was the client, his biggest investor, the one whose name gave Daniel credibility in the market. Losing him meant more than money. It meant blood in the water. He stormed out of his office, barking orders. "Call the staff meeting now." Within minutes, his employees sat around the conference table, eyes wary. Daniel paced the room, sweat beading on his forehead. "Listen to me," he said, voice sharp. "These are lies, spread by people who can't stand that we're winning. Crawford's weak," he panicked. "But the rest of you, you hold the line. Reassure our clients. Tell them everything is solid." But his words rang hollow. The staff exchanged nervous glances, their silence louder than any question. That evening, in their lavish home, Samantha cornered him in the kitchen. Her makeup was perfect, her dress glittering under the lights, but her expression was venom. "You're ruining everything," she hissed. "Do you know what people are saying? That you're crooked, that we've been living off stolen money. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" Daniel slammed his glass on the counter. "I told you, it's competitors. Lies. Don't you believe me?" Samantha folded her arms, her lips curling. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Across town, Rick sat at his desk, his face illuminated by the glow of the computer. He had been waiting for this moment, watching Daniel wobble under the weight of suspicion. But now he was ready to push harder, to strike deeper. He opened an envelope. Inside were photos, grainy but clear enough. Daniel, not with Samantha, but with another woman. Dates and locations neatly printed beneath. Rick had collected them through quiet channels, knowing one day they'd serve their purpose. He slid the photos into another envelope, no return address, and dropped it in the mail. 2 nights later, Daniel and Samantha hosted a dinner party at their home, desperate to project normalcy. Guests gathered around the table, laughter forced, wine flowing. Samantha played the gracious hostess, her smile stretched too thin. Halfway through the meal, she rose from her chair, an envelope in her hand. She tossed it onto the table in front of Daniel, the photos spilling across the linen. The room fell silent. Samantha's voice shook with fury. "Explain this, right now." Daniel's face drained of color. He fumbled for words, but nothing came. The guests stared, their forks frozen mid-air. "You humiliated me," Samantha spat. "You've been lying to me while parading me around like a trophy. Do you think I'm stupid?" The room buzzed with whispers, guests exchanging wide-eyed looks. Daniel stammered something about business meetings, misunderstandings, but his voice cracked under the weight of evidence. Samantha's chair screeched as she shoved it back and stormed out, leaving the guests in stunned silence. Daniel sat alone at the head of the table, exposed, his mask of confidence shattered. And miles away, Rick sat in his modest living room, the faint glow of a lamp, casting his shadow across the wall. He had no wine, no guests, no luxury, only silence. But when the silence broke into a smile on his face, it was genuine. For the first time in years, he felt like he was winning. He leaned back in his chair, savoring the storm he had created. The collapse had begun, and there would be no rebuilding. The headline landed like a hammer on a quiet Sunday morning. Local financier accused of bilking clients. The photo beneath showed Daniel at a ribbon-cutting jaw set, smile glossy. Rick stared at the paper on his kitchen table while the coffee went cold in his cup. The story ran 2 full pages, pull quotes in bold, charts shaded gray, sidebars naming victims who came forward. The byline belonged to a reporter known for claws. Her tone was calm, surgical, lethal. Every piece had come from him. The bank statements he'd traced with a ruler and pen. The timelines glued to his wall with pins and thread. The screenshots, the shell company LLCs, the miscellaneous consulting invoices that were anything but. Even the photos, Samantha's handbags, the Vegas floor, the champagne towers, sat in glossy color, as if they were exhibits in a trial. The article didn't accuse, it demonstrated. It guided the reader by the elbow from one discrepancy to the next, until denial had nowhere to sit. By 9 a.m., the story had been shared 1,000 times. By 10, radio talk shows were reading paragraphs live. By noon, the paper's site crashed under traffic. Rick refreshed, watched it reload, then folded the paper carefully, like a flag after battle. He did not smile, not yet. Across town, Daniel burst through the glass doors of his office and cut a path to his suite. He'd already seen the headline on his phone, but seeing printed copies on reception, left open as if they'd grown there, sent a bolt of heat up his spine. Employees stood, then sat, then pretended to type. No one met his eyes. His name hung in the air like smoke. "Conference room," he snapped. "Now." They gathered with legal pads and tight mouths. Daniel dropped the paper on the table. "It's garbage," he said. "Competitors feeding lies to a hack." No one answered. A junior analyst cleared his throat and asked, "Small, should we issue a statement?" Daniel's laugh came out wrong, too high, too thin. "A statement? I don't dignify gossip. We get our PR firm to threaten a lawsuit. We call the reporter. We tell clients this is a shakedown." But even as the words left him, he saw the details printed in black ink, the dates, the transfers, the names he thought were buried. His gaze flickered across faces around the table and met only the dull shine of doubt. Someone had given the reporter more than smoke. Someone had opened a vein. An assistant hovered in the doorway. "Samantha's online too," she whispered. He jabbed the button on the wall phone. "I'm handling it." Her voice came through tight, breathless. "Handling it? My mother is calling me in tears. My friends are texting screenshots. What is this?" "It's nothing," he said. "A smear." "Then why does it read like a ledger?" She shot back. "Why do they have photos of things you told me never to post? Daniel, tell me the truth." He could hear clinking dishes. She was at home, pacing the kitchen. He pictured the huge island, the fruit bowl, the perfect knives lined up like trophies. He closed his eyes. "Calm down. I'll fix it." "Fix it?" Her laugh was cold. "You're not a magician. If this is true, if any of it is true, I'm not going down with you." He stood there, jaw trembling, as the line clicked dead. Around the table, his staff pretended not to listen. He saw his reflection in the conference glass. Tie crooked, color drained, a man trying on his father's face. Rick drove slowly past the building just before lunch, windows cracked to let in the early spring air. The sidewalks were dotted with people holding newspapers the way they once held church programs. At the corner, 2 men leaned together over a phone scrolling. Rick recognized the posture of gossip, heads tilted, lips pursed, eyes gleaming. The front doors kept opening and closing, briskly, nervously. He didn't park. He just let the truck roll, hand loose on the wheel, as if cruising a street from childhood and finding it smaller than memory. A flash of guilt hit him, sharp and uninvited. The image appeared without warning. Daniel at 8 years old, hair sticking up, grease on his cheek from a day at the garage, asking if he could help like a real man. Rick had handed him a rag, played along, watched pride bloom on the boy's face. The memory rose and then receded, swallowed by the sight of Daniel's name, stamped beneath words like scheme and fraud. He tightened his grip on the wheel until the leather creaked. "Not yet," he murmured. "It's not enough." Inside the office, the day pitched forward. A client arrived unannounced and demanded to see the real books. Another called sobbing, not for money, but for dignity. The receptionist cried in the bathroom. Daniel ordered a statement drafted, then tore it up. He phoned a lawyer who wouldn't take the call and a publicist who would, for a retainer he couldn't wire fast enough. When Samantha finally walked into the lobby at dusk, sunglasses on through the light had faded. She didn't head for his office. She stopped at reception, asked to see the article, read it there with her arms folded tight. When she reached the section naming luxury purchases, her mouth pressed to a line. She looked toward Daniel's door, as if at a stranger's. He caught sight of her through the glass and rushed out. "We need to present a united front," he said. "Smile for cameras if they come. We schedule a charity event. She stepped back. "You schedule whatever you want." Her voice was flat. "If one number in here is real, I'm gone." He took another step, reached for her arm. She didn't let him touch her. "Don't," she said softly, with a kind of finality that cut through the noise. Then she turned and left. From his truck, Rick watched her past the front doors, watched Daniel hesitate, and then stop, trapped by eyes inside the lobby. A wind tugged at the newspaper cones in the outside trash can, lifting one loose page and sending it skittering along the sidewalk like a wounded bird. For a long moment, Rick simply sat and listened to the thud of his own heart. The guilt flickered once more. Mary's voice, maybe, or just the echo of what had once been love for a son. He let it flicker. He let it die. He whispered to the windshield, to the building, to the gathering dark. "Not yet. It's not enough." And with that, he shifted the truck into gear and pulled away, already thinking about the next lever to pull, the next thread to yank, the next place to apply the knife. Martha's small house smelled of stew simmering on the stove, but the warmth was shattered by the sudden pounding on the door. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, her heart already racing before she opened it. Daniel barged in without waiting for permission. His face was flushed, his eyes wild, his tie askew, like he'd wrestled it on the way over. He slammed the door behind him. "Where is he?" Daniel demanded, his voice sharp enough to rattle the windows. "Where's Rick? Don't play dumb." "Aunt Martha, I know he's behind this. The leaks, the papers, the regulators sniffing around. It's him. It has to be." Martha stiffened, clutching the towel to her chest. "Daniel, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Daniel snapped. He paced across the living room, knocking a picture frame off the mantel with his elbow. It clattered to the floor, glass shattering. "He's trying to ruin me, but I won't let him. I built everything I have, and I won't watch him tear it down out of spite." Martha knelt to pick up the broken frame, her voice soft but firm. "If Rick's doing anything, it's because you pushed him there. You hurt him, Daniel. You humiliated him." Daniel sneered, his lip curling. "Don't give me that sentimental garbage. He'll regret messing with me. You hear me? He'll regret it." The front door creaked open before Martha could answer. Both their heads turned. Rick stepped inside, his figure steady, almost eerily calm. The rain on his coat glistened in the dim light. "Then tell me to my face," Rick said. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the room like steel scraping against stone. Daniel's eyes widened, then narrowed. "So it is you," he spat. "You pathetic old man. You think you can touch me. You think a washed-up mechanic with a pension can take down everything I've built?" Rick closed the door behind him, not rushing, not raising his voice. He set his coat on the hook and walked into the living room, standing across from his son. His face was expressionless, his hands steady at his sides. "You banned me from your wedding," Rick said slowly, each word deliberate. "Now, I'm banning you from my life." Daniel's rage exploded. He lunged forward, shouting every insult he could find. Worthless, bitter, jealous, words meant to wound, to provoke. But Rick stood unmoving, his gaze fixed on his son with unnerving calm. The storm of insults washed over him like waves breaking against stone. Martha stood frozen between them, tears brimming in her eyes. She saw the boy she'd once babysat, red-faced and screaming, now grown into a man unraveling before her. She saw her brother, no longer just wounded, but hardened into something colder, beyond her reach. Daniel's voice finally cracked, his chest heaving. He jabbed a finger toward Rick. "You think this is over? You've declared war, and I don't lose." Rick didn't answer. He simply held his son's gaze, his silence louder than Daniel's rage. Daniel finally tore himself away, storming to the door and yanking it open so hard the hinges groaned. "You'll regret this," he shouted, his voice shaking with fury. "I swear to God, you'll regret it." The door slammed behind him, leaving the house vibrating in his absence. For a long moment, only the sound of rain against the windows filled the room. Martha turned to Rick, her face pale. "What have you done?" she whispered. Rick didn't answer. He moved back to the chair by the window, lowered himself into it, and folded his hands together. His eyes stayed fixed on the dark street outside, where Daniel's car had already disappeared into the storm. The war between father and son was no longer silent. It was out in the open now, a fire that could not be put back in the match. The knock came early, sharp and official. Rick opened the door to find a man in a suit standing on his porch, a leather folder in his hand. His voice was clipped, rehearsed. "Mr. Richard Mullen, you've been served." The folder was pressed into Rick's chest before he could answer. The man turned and left without ceremony, leaving only the sound of gravel crunching under his shoes. Rick carried the folder into the kitchen, set it on the table, and opened it slowly. His eyes scanned the bold type, restraining order. His son's name was listed as petitioner. For a moment, Rick sat perfectly still. The words felt surreal, detached, as if they belonged to someone else's life. Daniel was not only cutting him out, he was declaring him dangerous. The papers shook faintly in his hands, but Rick's face remained calm. He rose, crossed into the study, and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. The folder labeled Daniel was already thick with documents. He slid the restraining order neatly inside, pressing it flat against the rest. Then he closed the drawer with deliberate care. His war chest was growing. Across town, Samantha sat across from Daniel in their gleaming kitchen, her nails tapping against the marble counter. The paper spread out between them wasn't enough for her. "A restraining order is fine," she said, her tone sharp, "but it's not enough. He's making you look like a fool, Daniel. You need to finish him legally, crush him so he never dares again." Daniel paced the room, his jaw tight. "He's my father." Samantha's laugh was cold. "No, he's your enemy. Start treating him like one." The next week, Rick received another envelope. This one was thicker, stamped with the seal of the county court. Inside, the words made his pulse slow but heavy. Complaint for defamation. Daniel was suing him. Every leaked document, every rumor, every whisper now stood as evidence of slander. The demand for damages ran into the hundreds of thousands. Rick read it twice, then folded it and placed it in the same folder beside the restraining order. The file grew heavier, the name Daniel in block letters now looking almost carved into the manila. When the court date came, Rick walked into the courthouse alone. The hall smelled faintly of disinfectant, the buzz of fluorescent lights above. Daniel arrived in a tailored suit, Samantha on his arm, both projecting confidence for the cameras stationed outside. Inside the courtroom, the air was taut. Daniel's lawyer stood tall, presenting exhibits, claiming Rick had spread lies to destroy his son's business, his marriage, his future. Samantha nodded along, eyes glinting whenever the word defamation was spoken. Rick sat silently at the defense table. He didn't rise, didn't interrupt. His attorney spoke briefly, but Rick hardly listened. His eyes stayed fixed on Daniel, studying the twitch of his jaw, the restless movement of his hands. Each detail was another note for the file. When Daniel's testimony ended, the judge leaned back, weary. "Given the seriousness of these claims, I'm postponing a ruling until further evidence can be reviewed. Court is adjourned." The gavel struck. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot, final yet unresolved. Daniel smirked as he gathered his papers, whispering something to Samantha. She smiled thinly, her eyes flicking toward Rick as though victory was already secured. But Rick only sat there, unmoving, the corners of his mouth twitching into the faintest shadow of a smile. He had weathered worse storms, and this battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. Outside, the courthouse steps buzzed with reporters. Cameras flashed. Microphones thrust forward. Daniel straightened his tie, ready to perform. Rick walked past them all, silent, his face unreadable. The war was escalating, and the next move would be his. The courthouse air still clung to Rick as he stepped into his truck, but it wasn't the judge's gavel echoing in his ears. It was the thud in his chest, heavy and irregular, like a hammer striking against cracked wood. He gripped the steering wheel, trying to breathe through it, but the pain spread down his arm, up into his jaw. The world outside blurred. Horns honked when the light turned green, but Rick didn't move until the car behind him roared past. He pulled to the side of the road, his hand pressed to his chest, sweat beating at his temples despite the cool air. By the time he made it home, the pain had eased to a dull ache. Still, he knew he couldn't ignore it. He drove himself straight to Dr. Patel's office. Patel's face was grave as he studied the monitor, the numbers flashing in cold green. He set the stethoscope aside and folded his arms. Rick, this was a cardiac episode. Another one like that, and it could kill you. Rick sat on the edge of the exam table, his fists clenched. So what's the plan? Pills? More lectures? Patel's voice softened, though the weight in it never lightened. The plan is for you to stop. Stop this obsession with your son before it buries you. Your body is giving out. You can't carry this much anger and expect to live through it. Rick shook his head. If I die now, he wins. He gets the last word, the last laugh, the inheritance of silence. No, not like this. Patel studied him, sorrow in his eyes. Then you're choosing revenge over your own life. Rick looked away. No, I'm choosing purpose over wasting away. That night, unable to sleep, Rick drove out of town. The rain had started again, light at first, then building as the clouds swelled. He turned down the familiar road to the cemetery, the headlights cutting through mist and shadows. He parked by the gates and walked through rows of stones until he reached her. Mary's headstone was simple, her name carved cleanly, the years of her life too short for the love she'd given. Rick knelt down, his knees sinking into damp earth. His hand brushed moss from the stone. Hey, Mare, he whispered. His voice cracked, years of grief rushing back as though the wound had just opened. I don't come here enough, maybe because it hurts too much, or maybe because I'm ashamed of what I've become. The rain thickened, plastering his hair to his forehead. Lightning flashed overhead, the crack of thunder rolling across the hills. He pressed his palm flat against the stone. He's tearing everything apart, Mary, our boy. The boy you loved, the boy we raised. He cut me out like I was nothing, treated me like a stranger, and now he's trying to bury me before I'm even gone. Rick's shoulders shook. The tears came freely, mixing with rain, streaking his weathered face. His voice rose, raw and desperate. I tried to forgive him. I tried to let it go. But he doesn't stop. He won't stop until I'm erased. He bowed his head, his forehead resting against the cold stone. If I die tonight, he wins. But if I have one breath left, I'll use it to make him pay. I swear to you, Mary, before I join you, I'll see justice done. For me. For us. For everything he destroyed. The storm roared above, lightning splitting the sky, illuminating the cemetery in white fire. For a moment, Rick felt as though the heavens themselves bore witness to his vow. He rose slowly, his legs unsteady, but his eyes burned with clarity. Whatever time remained for him, days, months, maybe a year, would not be wasted in surrender. His heart might fail, his body might weaken, but his will had hardened into iron. Rick stood in the rain, his hand on the headstone, his voice steady now. This isn't vengeance anymore. It's destiny. The storm answered with another crack of thunder, and Rick turned toward the dark horizon, ready for what came next. Rick's dining table no longer resembled a place to eat. It was a war room now. covered edge to edge with files, photographs, spreadsheets, and printed emails. The piles that once seemed chaotic had been condensed, sharpened, reduced into a single stack. Months of obsession had become a weapon, and tonight he would give it its final polish. Jack sat across from him, reading glasses perched low on his nose. He sifted through a manila folder, his finger tapping the edge of a bank statement. "You've got enough here to bury him 3 times over," Jack muttered. "Transfers, shell companies, the client testimonies. Add in the photos of Samantha living off the cash. It's airtight." Rick leaned back, his body tired but his eyes clear. It needs to be more than airtight. It needs to be undeniable. No wriggle room, no chance he spins it as jealousy or market shifts. When this hits, it has to break him in front of everyone. Jack nodded, sliding a flash drive across the table. "Here's the digital package. Documents, images, timelines. I've triple encrypted it. Once it's in the right hands, there's no clawing it back." Rick picked it up, the tiny piece of plastic heavier in his palm than any tool he'd ever gripped. He slipped it into his jacket pocket. Tomorrow night, at the gala, his anniversary, he'll be standing in front of the cameras, toasting his success. And then, Jack finished the sentence for him. And then the floor drops out. Rick gave the faintest nod. His pulse quickened, not with fear, but with something sharper. Finality. The next day, he drove into town to pick up a suit. His old jackets were threadbare, his ties sun-faded. This moment demanded something different. He walked into the department store, the bright lights glaring, the mannequins frozen in perfect poses. A clerk approached, eager but cautious, sensing the gravity in Rick's manner. "Something classic," Rick said. "Black, nothing flashy." Minutes later, he stood before the mirror. The fabric draped across his shoulders. He barely recognized himself. The man staring back wasn't a retired mechanic. He wasn't a widower or a father discarded like trash. He looked like a man heading into battle, armored not with steel, but with certainty. That evening, as he laid the suit carefully across his bed, Martha came by. She didn't knock. She simply let herself in, carrying a dish wrapped in foil. Her eyes fell on the suit, then on the piles of folders still stacked neatly in the corner. She set the dish down and turned to him. "Rick, please, I'm begging you. Stop this before it swallows you whole. You've proven your point. Everyone sees Daniel for what he is now. Why risk more?" Rick's hands paused on the hanger. He looked at her, his sister, the one who had carried his secrets, who had tried again and again to pull him back from the edge. His voice softened, but it didn't waver. "It's too late, Martha. I can't stop now." Tears welled in her eyes. "You're not hearing me. If you go through with this, there's no coming back, for him or for you. What will be left of you when it's done?" Rick walked over, took her trembling hands in his. For the first time in months, he let warmth into his grip. He pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly, the way a soldier holds a loved one before heading into the unknown. When he finally pulled back, his eyes shone with something between sorrow and resolve. "I love you, sis, but this isn't about saving myself anymore. Tomorrow my son will fall." Martha broke into quiet sobs, shaking her head as he released her. She turned towards the door, unable to bear the sight of the man her brother had become. When the house was silent again, Rick returned to the table. He placed the flash drive neatly atop the final folder, then turned out the light. His suit hung ready, his shoes polished, his heart steady. The storm inside him was gone. Only destiny remained. The ballroom gleamed like a cathedral of excess. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, light catching on crystal glasses and sequined gowns. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their notes weaving through the hum of conversation. The banners read Mullen & Co. Executions, 5 years of excellence, though everyone knew the real purpose. Tonight was Daniel's attempt at resurrection. His anniversary gala would be proof that he was untouchable. Rick entered unnoticed, his black suit blending in with the sea of tuxedos. He walked with measured steps, his posture straight, his expression calm. No one recognized him at first. To them, he was just another older guest, a distant investor, a relic from another circle. He moved towards the edge of the room, close enough to see everything, far enough to remain invisible. Daniel and Samantha worked the crowd like royalty. Daniel's laugh carried across the ballroom, practiced and hollow, as he clasped hands and promised stability. Samantha shimmered in a champagne-colored gown, her smile a blade. Cameras flashed as she leaned into her husband, whispering lines rehearsed in front of the mirror. For a few fleeting minutes, it almost worked. The guests forgot the headlines, the whispers, the doubts. Rick sipped water from a crystal glass, his eyes fixed on the stage at the center of the room. That was where it would happen. That was where the edifice would crack. Hours passed in murmurs and wine refills. Then Daniel took the stage, microphone in hand, Samantha at his side. His voice boomed with false confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is not just about celebration. It's about resilience. It's about family. It's about trust. The words landed heavy in Rick's chest, almost laughable in their hypocrisy. He felt his jaw tighten, but his face remained unreadable. The crowd applauded, eager to be reassured. Investors nodded. Staff smiled nervously, and for a moment Daniel looked victorious. He raised his glass high, his smile stretched wide, and then the doors burst open. The music stopped with a screech of strings. Men and women in dark suits filed into the ballroom, badges glinting under the chandeliers. The lead agent's voice cut through the silence. Federal regulators, we have warrants. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel froze mid-toast, the glass trembling in his hand. The color drained from his face as cameras swiveled, catching every second. Samantha's shriek pierced the room as agents fanned out, their voices commanding, authoritative. Daniel Mullen, you are under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. The words landed like gunfire. Investors stumbled back, clutching purses and briefcases. The ballroom erupted into chaos, guests scattering, chairs toppling, glasses shattering on marble floors. Paparazzi surged forward, their flashes strobing like lightning as Daniel's empire collapsed under the weight of evidence. Samantha clawed at his arm, her voice cracking. Do something, Daniel. Stop them. But Daniel could only stammer, his voice breaking. This is a mistake. It's competitors. Lies. The agents ignored him. They took him by the arms, twisting them behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed, sharp and final. Daniel's eyes darted across the room, desperate for someone, anyone, to step forward. But all he saw were turned backs and raised phones capturing his downfall. Rick stood in the corner, still as stone. His lips moved just enough to release a whisper only he could hear. Happy anniversary. The irony was almost too much. The night meant to restore Daniel's reputation had become the scene of his public execution. Every camera lens, every stunned guest, every gasp was another nail in the coffin Rick had built piece by piece. Samantha screamed again, her voice raw, mascara streaking down her face as agents guided Daniel toward the exit. She tried to lunge after him, but photographers blocked her path, their cameras clicking relentlessly. Daniel caught Rick's eye for a single moment as he was dragged past. His face was pale, sweat dripping, rage and fear warring in his expression. He mouthed something, curse, threat, plea, but the words vanished in the roar of chaos. Rick didn't move. He didn't gloat. He simply watched, his expression unreadable, the satisfaction buried deep beneath layers of control. The ballroom emptied into silence, the air heavy with perfume and panic. Only broken glass and toppled chairs remained where, moments before, there had been laughter and applause. Rick walked slowly toward the exit, slipping out as quietly as he had entered. No one stopped him. No one noticed him. He was a ghost in the wreckage, unseen yet everywhere. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, streaking the black cars lined at the curb. Rick lifted his face to the storm, the drops cold against his skin. He felt no triumph, no relief, only inevitability. Daniel was in handcuffs. The empire was crumbling. But Rick knew deep inside, this was not the end. It was only the next turn in the war. The morning after the gala, Rick woke to the sound of voices. Not in his home, but spilling from the television he had left on through the night. News anchors spoke with grave intensity, their words slicing through the quiet of his living room. Daniel Mullen, prominent financier, was arrested last night at a charity gala, accused of orchestrating a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Clips rolled in endless loops, Daniel in handcuffs, head ducked, face pale under the barrage of camera flashes. Samantha screaming, mascara streaking, her designer gown dragging across the marble floor. Guests scattering like startled birds. Every angle, every frame, replayed until the images felt etched into the nation's mind. Rick sat on the couch in his robe, a half-empty glass of water on the table beside him. He watched without blinking, his expression unreadable. The words should have tasted like victory, but instead they sat heavy, bitter. By noon, the coverage had shifted. Headlines crawled across screens. Mullen marriage crumbles. Samantha's attorney had confirmed she was filing for divorce. She released a statement crafted in careful legalese, portraying herself as blindsided, betrayed, another victim of Daniel's deception. The same woman who had once whispered in his ear, who had urged him to crush his father, now cut ties in record time. Rick turned off the volume, watching her face move silently on the screen. The divorce papers didn't surprise him, but they left him uneasy. Daniel had lost everything, his reputation, his wife, his freedom. But the satisfaction Rick had imagined didn't arrive. Instead, an emptiness spread inside him, a hollow echo where triumph should have lived. Later that day, Martha came by. She sat at his kitchen table, clutching a tissue in her hands, tears streaming freely. "Rick, I don't know how to feel," she whispered. "I can't stop thinking about him in that cell. He's guilty, yes, but he's still Daniel. He's still your son, my nephew. Part of me wants to scream at him, and part of me wants to hold him." Rick didn't answer. He sipped his coffee, staring at the dark liquid as though it might reveal the truth. Martha reached for his hand, her grip trembling. "You've destroyed him," she said softly, "but I think you've destroyed yourself too." That night, Rick returned to Dr. Patel for another appointment. The doctor's expression was grim before he even spoke. "Your heart is failing faster than I feared," Patel said, sliding the chart across the desk. "Your blood pressure is uncontrolled. The last attack nearly killed you. If you don't change something now, stop the stress, stop this obsession, you may not have another year." Rick chuckled dryly, shaking his head. "If I die now, Doc, I die on my terms, not his." Patel leaned forward, his voice firm. "This isn't about him anymore, Rick. It's about you. What's left of you? Do you want to leave this world with nothing but anger?" Rick's eyes hardened. "Anger is all I've got left. It's what's kept me alive." He left the office without scheduling another visit. Back home, the television glowed late into the night. Every update, every headline, every replay of Daniel's mugshot pulled Rick deeper into his obsession. He scribbled notes during coverage, analyzing every phrase used by reporters, every expression Daniel wore in court. His journal filled with fragmented lines. "He looks beaten. He looks small. He looks like he finally knows." The revenge was real. The downfall complete. Yet each time Rick turned off the screen, silence swallowed him, heavier than before. He would stare at Mary's photo on the mantel, waiting for pride, for relief, for peace. None came. Only the gnawing truth. That revenge was sweet, but it had not healed him. Still, he wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. The prison loomed gray against the horizon, a fortress of concrete and razor wire. Rick parked his truck in the visitor's lot, his hands steady on the wheel. He had received the call the day before. Daniel had demanded to see him. No apology, no explanation, just a demand. Inside, the corridor smelled faintly of bleach and metal. Guards led him through security checkpoints, their keys clinking like tiny bells of judgment. Rick walked with measured steps, his face unreadable, his eyes forward. He felt no fear, no nervousness, only the weight of inevitability. The visiting room was a barren space, lined with metal tables bolted to the floor. A guard gestured to one. Rick sat down, his posture straight, his hands folded loosely in front of him. Minutes later, Daniel was brought in. The sight of him made the air shift. Gone was the polished suit, the gleaming smile. In its place, an orange jumpsuit, sagging at the shoulders, the fabric rough against his skin. His wrists were cuffed until the guard released him into the chair across from Rick. For a moment, father and son simply stared at each other. The silence between them felt heavier than the walls, thicker than the glass, separating other visitors from inmates. Then Daniel spoke, his voice sharp, dripping venom. "You destroyed me." Rick's expression didn't change. His voice was calm, even. "You destroyed yourself. I just showed the world." Daniel slammed his palms against the table, the sound echoing in the hollow room. His eyes burned with rage. "Don't twist this. You couldn't stand that I was better than you, that I built something while you rotted away with nothing. You were jealous, pathetic. You wanted me to fail." Rick leaned forward slightly, his tone steady, controlled. "No, I wanted you to be a man. Instead, you chose to be a thief, and thieves always end up here." The words landed like stones. Daniel flinched, though he tried to mask it. His jaw clenched, his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. The silence returned, pressing down on both of them. Other conversations in the room faded into nothing. It was just father and son, locked in a battle that had no weapons left, only words. Daniel's breathing grew heavier. His chest rose and fell as if the fury inside him was too big for his frame. And then, unexpectedly, it broke. His face twisted, his eyes glistened, and for the first time since he was a child, Daniel sobbed. The sound was raw, unrestrained, spilling out of him with years of arrogance collapsing under its weight. He dropped his face into his hands, shoulders shaking violently. Rick sat perfectly still. His heart did not soften. His hands did not reach out. He watched his son unravel, watched the boy he once carried on his shoulders, reduced to a broken man in a prison jumpsuit. The sobs filled the room, echoing against the steel and concrete. Other visitors turned to look. Guards shifted uncomfortably, but Rick remained unmoved. His eyes were steady, his jaw firm. When Daniel finally lifted his face, red and streaked with tears, he looked across the table for mercy, for forgiveness, for anything. But Rick's gaze held none. Without a word, Rick rose from his chair. The legs scraped against the concrete floor with a sound that cut through Daniel's sobs. He signaled to the guard with a nod, calm and deliberate. The guard stepped forward, taking Rick toward the exit. Daniel reached out across the table, his voice cracking. "Wait, Dad." Rick didn't turn back. The heavy door closed behind him, sealing Daniel's cries inside. As Rick stepped into the gray light of the outside world, he felt no triumph, no release, only the confirmation of what he already knew. There was nothing left to salvage. The house greeted Rick with silence, not the gentle quiet of rest, but the suffocating kind that pressed against the walls, filling every corner. He closed the door behind him and stood in the hallway, listening to the emptiness as though it might speak. He walked slowly through the rooms, the living room with its worn sofa and cold fireplace, the kitchen, where 2 mugs still sat in the sink from weeks ago, untouched. Upstairs, the bed was neatly made, but untouched as well, as if waiting for someone who would never return. On the mantel sat Mary's photo. She stared out from the frame, her smile frozen in the snapshot of another life. But tonight, under the dim lamplight, Rick didn't see the warmth in her eyes. He saw judgment, disappointment. He stepped closer, his hand brushing the glass. His voice was a whisper, hoarse from disuse. "I did it for us." But the words didn't echo. They died in the air, swallowed by the silence. The house didn't answer. Neither did she. Rick sank into his chair, the one where he had spent countless nights plotting, scribbling, collecting evidence. The war was over. Daniel was in prison. The name Mullen, once tarnished by arrogance, was now broken beyond repair. Victory was his. Yet the quiet weighed heavier than defeat. A knock at the door broke the stillness. Rick rose reluctantly, opening it to find Martha standing on the porch. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with worry, but she forced a small smile. "Thought you could use some company?" she said, stepping inside with the ease of someone who had done it 100 times before. She looked around the room, her gaze settling on the photo of Mary, then on Rick's face. "It doesn't feel like a win, does it?" Rick didn't answer. He sat back down, staring at the floor. Martha pulled a chair across from him. Her voice was soft, but insistent. "Rick, you've punished him. You've shown the world what he is. But if you don't let go, it's going to keep punishing you." Rick lifted his eyes, his expression hard. "Some wounds don't heal, Martha. Some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness." She flinched, tears threatening but unshed. "If you believe that, then he's already taken more from you than you realize." Rick turned away, his jaw tightening. He couldn't bear the look in her eyes, the hope, the plea for him to soften. The silence returned between them, heavy and unyielding. Martha rose quietly after a moment, touching his shoulder as she passed. "I'll come back tomorrow," she whispered, though she sounded unconvinced. The door closed gently behind her. Rick remained where he was, the lamplight casting long shadows across the empty room. Mary's photo stared down at him, silent as ever. The darkness lingered, heavier than victory, heavier than loss. Rick dreamed he was back in the driveway, years younger, grease on his hands, the summer sun burning down. A small boy came running toward him, legs pumping, arms outstretched. Daniel, no more than 7, his face lit up with unfiltered joy. "Dad, catch me!" Rick dropped his wrench and opened his arms. The boy collided into his chest, laughing, sticky with popsicle sugar. Rick lifted him high, spinning him in a circle, the world blurring into light and warmth. Mary stood in the doorway, smiling, her hair catching the sun. For a moment, everything was whole. Then the laughter cracked like glass. The boy slipped from his arms, falling, his smile twisting into accusation as the dream shattered. Rick woke with a gasp, his chest heaving. Tears streaked his face before he even realized he was crying. A sharp pain lanced through his chest, stealing his breath. He clutched at his shirt, gasping, waiting for the ache to ease. It passed after long, agonizing seconds, leaving him weak, trembling, drenched in sweat. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. For the first time, doubt crept into the fortress he had built. The dream's echo still clung to him, the boy's laughter, the warmth of his arms, the look on Mary's face. Was revenge worth this? Worth the silence of his house, the bitterness in his veins, the nights he woke alone with only shadows for company? The questions gnawed at him, louder than the storm he had unleashed. Later that morning, Martha arrived unannounced, carrying a basket of groceries. She took one look at him, his pale face, the sheen of sweat on his brow, and set the basket down without a word. "You had another attack, didn't you?" she said quietly. Rick didn't answer. His silence was enough. Martha sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes brimmed with sorrow, but her voice was steady. "Rick, this is killing you. Not Daniel, not the court battles, not even the stress. It's the hate. It's eating you alive." Rick looked at her, his lips pressed into a hard line. She reached across the table, her hand covering his. "Forgiveness isn't about letting him off the hook. It's about freeing yourself. You don't have to carry this anymore." Her words hung in the air, fragile but heavy. For once, Rick didn't snap back, didn't harden. He only looked down at their joined hands, his chest rising and falling slowly. That afternoon, after Martha left, Rick sat at his desk. The house was quiet, save for the scratching of his pen against paper. "Daniel," he wrote, the name trembling on the page. He began haltingly, the words uneven. "You were my son. I tried to give you everything. Maybe I failed you. Maybe you failed me. I don't know anymore." His hand shook as he wrote about Mary, about the boy in the driveway, about the pride he once carried like armor. The words poured out of him, raw, jagged, painful. For a moment, it felt almost like release. When he finished, he stared at the letter. The paper was stained with a single drop, tear or sweat, he couldn't tell. He folded it once, twice, then stopped. His jaw tightened. Slowly, deliberately, he tore the paper down the middle. Then again, and again. The pieces drifted into the trash like ashes. Rick sat back, his chest heavy, his eyes burning. He had tried to reach for something softer, something freer, but he couldn't hold it, not yet. The silence of the house returned, and with it, the darkness that never left. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and paper. Rick sat on the edge of the exam table, while Dr. Patel flipped through his chart, the silence more telling than any words. Finally, the doctor set it down, removing his glasses. "Rick," Patel said quietly, "time is running short. Your heart isn't going to hold out forever. I need you to think beyond treatments, beyond surviving the next attack. What do you want to leave behind?" Rick stared at the floor. The question landed harder than any diagnosis. Legacy. The word felt foreign, almost cruel. "I don't have an heir anymore," Rick muttered. "No family. Daniel's gone, Mary's gone. There's no one left." Patel leaned forward, his tone firm but compassionate. "That doesn't mean your story ends in bitterness. You still have resources, your savings, your house, your name. You can decide what they stand for after you're gone. Do you want to be remembered for anger? Or for something more?" Rick let the words settle in the air. He pictured his modest bank account, the pension he had lived on, the house filled with echoes. None of it would go to Daniel, not after everything. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine giving it away, to a scholarship, a charity, maybe even the families Daniel had ruined. The thought left him both unsettled and strangely lighter. Later, back at the house, Martha came by with a casserole she knew he wouldn't touch. She found him sitting in the living room, the television dark for once, his expression distant. "What did Patel say?" she asked, easing into the chair across from him. Rick sighed, rubbing his temples. "He said I should think about my legacy, what I leave behind." Martha studied him, her eyes soft. "And what did you tell him?" "That I don't have an heir, no family, no one to care." Her lips trembled, but she steadied herself. "You still have me, but even if you didn't, you could still be remembered." "Rick, you've lived through so much. Don't let the final line of your story be revenge. Be remembered for more than that." Rick looked at her, his jaw working. He wanted to argue, to dismiss her words as naive, but instead, he sat quietly, his chest tightening with something he didn't want to name. Martha reached across, her hand warm on his. "Do one good thing, something that isn't about Daniel. Give people a reason to say your name with kindness when you're gone." For a long time, Rick didn't answer. Then finally, he gave a slow nod. "Maybe I'll talk to a lawyer, see what it would take to set something up. A donation, maybe." Martha squeezed his hand, relief flooding her eyes. "That's all I ask. Think about peace, Rick. Just think about it." That night, Rick sat at his desk, the folder labeled Daniel still in the drawer, but he didn't open it. Instead, he pulled out a yellow legal pad and began jotting notes, names of charities, ideas for scholarships, vague outlines of how to split what little he had. The pen moved slowly, reluctantly, as if fighting against his hand. The thought of peace unsettled him. It felt like surrender, like laying down a weapon before the final strike. But another part of him, the part that still dreamed of Daniel as a child, running into his arms, wondered if this was the only way to reclaim what little humanity he had left. He stared at the notes long after the ink dried, his chest heavy, his mind divided. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation, the kind of silence that builds before a storm. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens poised, cameras ready to capture the moment. Lawyers shuffled papers, their voices hushed, but all eyes turned toward the bench as the judge entered. Rick sat quietly in the gallery, Martha beside him. His suit felt heavier than usual, the collar pressing against his throat. He clasped his hands in his lap, his gaze fixed on the man across the room, Daniel. He looked thinner now, paler, his once polished demeanor replaced by a restless edge. His suit was ill-fitting, borrowed perhaps, and his hair had lost its shine. But his eyes burned the same, defiant, sharp, locked onto Rick, as though the whole trial, the whole world, came down to the space between them. The judge's voice broke the tension. "Daniel Mullen, this court finds you guilty of multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. You are hereby sentenced to 12 years in state prison." The words reverberated through the chamber, final and unyielding. Daniel didn't flinch at first. He sat frozen, lips pressed tight, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the table. Slowly, he turned his head toward Rick, his glare sharp enough to cut through glass. It was a look of hatred, of betrayal, of blame. A look that said, "You did this to me." Rick met his eyes and did not look away. He felt no triumph, no relief, only the weight of inevitability. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled frantically, some darting toward the doors to send the news. Microphones swung toward Rick the moment he stepped into the aisle. "Mr. Mullen, do you have a statement? Do you feel justice has been served? Will you ever reconcile with your son?" Their voices overlapped, a wall of questions pressing in. Rick kept his head down, pushing past them. He offered no words, no expressions. Silence was his only answer. Martha stayed close, her hand finding his as they moved toward the exit. She squeezed it firmly, a small anchor in the storm of cameras and shouting. Her touch reminded him he wasn't entirely alone, even if it felt that way. As they stepped outside, flashes blinded them, reporters calling his name again and again. Rick paused only long enough to steady his breath. He gave no comment, no glance toward the cameras. For the public, the chapter was closed. Daniel Mullen sentenced, his empire dismantled, his marriage gone, his name ruined. But as Rick walked to the car, Martha at his side, he felt an unease gnawing beneath the surface. It wasn't over, not for him. The gavel had fallen, the sentence declared, but something in Daniel's glare still lingered, sharp as a knife. The story seemed finished. Or so it appeared. The house was still when it struck. Rick had been sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of untouched coffee cooling by his elbow, when the pain seized him. It started as a tightness, then sharpened, crushing his chest like a vice. His breath hitched, his vision blurred. He reached for the counter but missed, crumpling to the floor. His hand clawed at his shirt, desperate to tear away the weight pressing down on him. The silence of the house mocked him, offering no help, no witness. The phone lay on the table above, impossibly far. He tried to push himself up, his arms trembling, but the strength bled from him. A groan escaped his lips, raw and broken. By some miracle, Martha arrived minutes later. She had planned only to drop off groceries, but when she opened the door and called his name, the sound of his collapse drew her to the kitchen. "Rick!" she screamed, rushing to his side. His face was pale, lips tinged blue, sweat soaking his shirt. She fumbled for her phone with shaking hands, dialing for help, even as she pressed a trembling palm against his chest. "Stay with me. Don't you dare leave me too." The paramedics came quickly, voices sharp and practiced as they worked. Oxygen mask, compressions, monitors beeping. Martha clutched the doorframe, praying under her breath as they lifted him onto the stretcher. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights were merciless, exposing every line, every shadow on Rick's face. Dr. C. Patel met Martha in the hallway, his expression grave. "He's stable, for now, but this was massive. One more like it could be the last." Inside the room, Rick stirred, eyes fluttering open. The tubes and machines around him beeped steadily. He turned his head slowly, finding Martha's tear-streaked face. His lips curled into the faintest smile, weak but defiant. "Then I won." The words broke her. She shook her head violently, gripping his hand as tears spilled unchecked. "No, Rick. No, you lost everything. Don't you see? You lost your son. You lost your health. You lost yourself." Her voice cracked, heavy with years of grief and love. But Rick only turned his gaze away, toward the window. Beyond the glass, the city lights blurred into a haze, distant and indifferent. He said nothing more. His silence weighed heavier than her sobs, heavier than the machines keeping rhythm with his failing heart. The cost of revenge lingered in the air, undeniable, inescapable. The prison felt colder this time. Months had passed since Rick last set foot inside, but the air still smelled of bleach and rust, the silence broken only by the clatter of distant doors. He moved slowly down the corridor, each step echoing like a drumbeat. His body was weaker now, his heart a constant reminder of borrowed time, but his will carried him forward. The guards led him to the same visiting room, the same metal table bolted to the floor. Rick sat down, his back straight, despite the ache in his bones. He waited. The door opened with a metallic groan, and Daniel shuffled in. Rick almost didn't recognize him. His son, once polished and proud, was now gaunt. The jumpsuit hung loose on his frame, his skin pale under the harsh lights. His eyes, once sharp with arrogance, looked hollow, rimmed with fatigue. The swagger was gone. In its place was something smaller, broken. Daniel sat across from him, his hands trembling as they rested on the table. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Finally, Daniel's lips moved. His voice cracked, hoarse from disuse. "I hate you," he muttered. His gaze flicked up, meeting Rick's for the briefest moment. "But I'm still your son." The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore, impossible to breathe. Rick's heart clenched, not from weakness, but from something deeper. The face before him was no longer the son who had cut him out of his wedding, who had sent him bills and spat venom. It wasn't the boy from the driveway either, laughing and running into his arms. It was a stranger wearing fragments of both, broken in ways that could never be repaired. He wanted, for a moment, to feel something other than this hollowness. Anger, grief, pity, anything. But all that remained was the weight of truth. Rick leaned forward, his voice quiet but steady, sharper than steel. "Not anymore." Daniel flinched as though struck. His lips parted, but no words came. His eyes glistened with tears he refused to let fall. The space between them, once filled with years of love and betrayal, was now nothing but a gulf too wide to cross. Rick rose from his chair, every movement deliberate. He didn't offer another glance, another word. His footsteps echoed as he walked toward the door. Behind him, Daniel's breathing grew ragged, but Rick didn't look back. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. The heavy door closed between them, sealing the last thread of their bond. Outside, the sky stretched wide and pale. Clouds parted slowly, and a shaft of sunlight broke through, casting long beams across the parking lot. Rick paused, lifting his face to the light. For the first time in months, he felt a strange stillness inside him. Not peace, never peace, but finality. The war was over, not because forgiveness had been found, but because nothing remained to fight for. Resolution had come, not through healing, but through separation. Father and son, no longer bound, no longer tethered. Rick walked to his truck, the weight in his chest still there, but steadier now. He turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling to life. As he pulled out of the lot, the sunlight followed, chasing shadows across the cracked pavement. The world moved on, indifferent, uncaring, and for Rick, that was enough.